Hello and welcome to our second edition of our bonus flashback episodes looking back at the decade that was for the 2010s. I'm your host, Alex, and with me this time I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Good evening, Alex. Yeah, I'm doing well. Not too bad at all after the weekend result, but I guess a good opportunity now to walk down memory lane.
Yeah, definitely. And look, we'll be talking. Well, so this episode will go out for our patrons first of all, just after we record this one, but then it'll go out to everyone else in a week's time. So by then, by the time everyone's listening to it, we will have already been covering, hopefully, a win against Ipswich as well as the fantastic win against MK Dons. But we are here to talk about our flashback episodes, and this week we're doing the second half of the 2010-2011 season. So just before we get into, obviously, some pretty momentous sort of events took place towards the November-December time of that season. What we did last time was we talked about the shirt that I've got, which was a Tom Kearney shirt that I got probably a couple of months into that season. So I thought we'd talk about the shirt that you've got on. I'll flick the screen up so we can get a better look at it. But it was the away shirt that season, and we were chatting just before the episode about the reasoning behind why you got it.
Yeah, I think it was our longest away winning streak in the history of the club, and I think it got to something ridiculous. I'm sure it was 14 games.
I think it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and in a season where we finished, I think we ended up tracking about 11th or 12th. I know it was kind of mid-table to break the away game record of unbeaten streaks is phenomenal achievement. I think it probably just speaks to how much of a rare thing it really is to not only go that long unbeaten away from home, but particularly when you see where we finished up, it makes it even more of a truly amazing feat.
And even more amazing was the fact that I think when we beat Norwich earlier in the season, which it was a game that Brad and I touched on last time, I think that was actually to break a really long winless away streak as well. So we sort of went from one extreme to the other, where we went from just having no luck away from home to really sort of putting it all together.
Yeah, and especially when you kind of reflect on the history of the club, or particularly the recent history, and you think it's probably fair to say that we've been a yo-yo club, although the heights that we've reached have been spectacularly high. And I guess where we find ourselves now is the lowest of those points. But I guess when you walk back and think about some of the things that have taken place, I guess a 14-game away from home streak in amongst an FA Cup final and a couple of promotions and relegations. It's truly remarkable.
Did you get a name on the back, or is it just a plain one?
This was just a blankie. This was kept it simple. It was more for the memorabilia. I thought this jersey seemed quite prominent in the sense that I don't know how long it will be before that streak gets broken again. It might be a collector's item in a few years to come.
Yeah, and we don't have a whole. I'm just trying to think back over recent seasons. I can't think of too many white away shirts that we've had. We normally go for the black, or with a blue sometimes. I think, was it last season or the season before? I think we did have a white one, but they're reasonably rare for us.
Yeah, absolutely. They do seem to go against the grain of the Tiger model that we do like to hold with the black and amber.
Definitely. Okay. Well, we will jump on to the first sort of topic of discussion, which is always probably a controversial one these days, which in a lot of ways is a really sad turn of affairs, because at the time this was a really exciting and a really positive move for the club, which was the takeover by the Allams, which was officially ratified on the 16th of December back in 2010. And really, by bringing them into the club, Adam Pearson really sort of saved us from financial ruin, really. We were presumably on the verge of going into administration, and who knows what would have happened after that. The chances of staying up would have been quite slim. And so the Allams came into the club. They were local businessmen, so they weren't sort of the sort of nasty foreign owners you sometimes get at clubs. There was that sort of local connection with them. So it was a really sort of positive, and we were sort of looking at the 2010-11 season, so we'll kind of try and keep it to that, but it's hard to discuss this takeover without what came after that. What are your memories, I guess, first of all, of the takeover happening and the sense of optimism that it brought?
I think it's kind of important to remember that any club of particularly a championship level, when you hear them getting linked, particularly with overseas businessmen or millionaires or billionaires from abroad, there's an excitement that comes with it. Given the fact that you see the model of, say, a Man City, and it's only kind of normal that a club like ours start to dream. And I think that whilst that didn't kind of reach those same heights, we were really kind of aware of the financial predicament we were in at the time. And it was certainly widely publicised. I remember reading articles in the Daily Mail, and even just a lot of the reporting that was coming out of Hull at the time was so much around this idea that things were looking rather grim, and the sense of the Allams taking over was kind of the saving grace. And it was the only real hope that we had, particularly having tasted Premier League football and starting to kind of feel a little bit greedy. Also, the kind of the downward spiral, if you like, after being relegated. There's always that sense of, will we ever get back there? And so I think that those two things combined with the paranoia that we felt of, are we going to be just a languishing club now? Will we ever get back to where we were? And I think that that coincided when the Allams took over, that it did provide a huge sense of belief and an optimism that we've got the financial backing, we can see ourselves out of this debt, and there's no reason that we couldn't go again and make another challenge at trying to get back up into the top flight. So I do remember it being an extremely positive time, and it came at a really critical time too, because it was so much of it, as I said, the reports were doom and gloom. And when it finally got done, I think, like everyone, we were really excited about the prospect of these new owners and what could be.
Yeah, I think it would have been just before they took over. It might have been the draw against Leeds earlier, a couple of weeks earlier, where we actually dropped into the relegation zone. So that sort of prospect of a double relegation was sort of starting to loom pretty large. You sort of touched on there the financial backing that they gave, and I think the fact that probably as a sort of precursor of what was to come with the more shambolic elements of their reign, I think Allams came out and sort of said that they'd done their due diligence, but there was a lot of costs that hadn't been uncovered during that, and that if they'd known, they might not have committed. And they ended up having to commit a further £10 million on top of the $30 million that they thought they would need to cover the debt. But then even on top of that, we'll go on and talk about the players that were signed, but they certainly in those early days weren't afraid to throw a lot of money at City and really get us going again. And, some owners might have come in and sort of put a bit of money in to get the club going or to kind of keep the lights on and the doors open, but they kind of went above and beyond that in terms of the players they signed, in terms of the comments they made, I guess, looking back on them, are pretty empty. Allams was saying that football should be free, it should be like the air we breathe, and was all this talk about making tickets really cheap, talking about extending the stadium, all those sorts of things, which were really exciting at the time, didn't really amount to much in the end. But it was certainly a very optimistic start to their time at City.
Yeah, it certainly was. And I think one of the things that kind of would be rude not to touch upon as well was some of the players that we still had signed, as you mentioned, was I think Jimmy Bullard was still collecting a handsome fee. And I know that his Premier League contract was reported was like £45,000 a week. And I'm pretty sure that he didn't have a clause in his contract in the Championship that lessened that. And I think that, I guess from a business standpoint now, when we think about how football's run, particularly for a club of our size, it was just absurd that we had earners that big still on the books, and particularly someone like Jimmy Bullard, who was certainly injury prone and kind of will be always remembered by Hull fans for, I guess, the wholly burnt in our pocket, so to speak, for not much return. But I think that that's a really important factor when we consider exactly what you mentioned with how the Allams operated, knowing that they were still carrying on with burdens such as Jimmy.
Yeah, and look, I think that's a good segue into talking about the departures that came that January, I guess. And Bullard, as you mentioned, who had been a pretty big financial burden was let out on loan to Ipswich and would then depart on a permanent in the summer. And in fact, I think the departure was really because the Allams were able to find a clause in his contract or tear up his contract even because of some misdeeds off the field. So, they certainly were very tough operators in that sense. And on that occasion, it actually worked in our favour. But of course, in others, it wasn't necessarily to be the case. But a couple of players pictured who are City legends of their own right. Ashby, absolutely, captain in the club throughout 4 divisions. No other footballer in professional English football can lay claim to doing the same as him. And then, of course, Caleb Follen as well, who had some pretty impressive displays for us in both the Championship and the Premier League. So, the departures didn't just stop in that summer when we were relegated from the Premier League. They continued on into the January.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that already touching on Ian Ashby, someone who kind of transcends his time period, playing through the divisions with Hull and just being that really gritty, gutsy leader. And you always knew that if Ian Ashby was on the field, that there wasn't really going to be a sense that it was going to be acceptable for Hull to lie down. And I think it kind of speaks into who he was as a player and the kind of the style that we played. That real underdog tag of punching well above our weight was largely due to players like him and the mentality and example that he kind of set forward. And it's amazing even now in City circles to hear how frequently talked about Ash still is. You're talking about Caleb Follen in the same bracket here. And of course, there's almost a romance with a player of him because he really performed at the peak of City's height, particularly in that first visit to the Premier League. But you'd just be amiss to not really highlight just what a critical player Ash is in the City fabric, and how much a player like him has really been a big reason as to why we've been able to taste the joys and experience the heights that we have reached over the last decade.
Yeah, look, he was certainly a player who I only started following City really during that Premier League stint, but from everything that I hear, he was one of those sorts of players where each division that we reached, there was always a little bit of talk about, well, maybe we need to find someone to replace him, maybe we need to strengthen in that area, but he would just make that position his own and prove that he was able to take that next step with City. And you see a few players like that at clubs. And of course, we had Myhill and Dawson and France as well, who made those steps up with Ashby. But to do that and to captain your club and to have the seriousness of injuries that he had in his time and still sort of push through and fight back and continue playing was an absolute testament to his character. And as you say, it's a testament as well on the fact that ever since he's left, I think the most, normally at a club and to us to an extent, we always sort of talk about, we need a prolific striker. But with us, it's also always, we need an Ashby type in midfield. And I think it's a testament to his sort of lasting legacy at the club that's that sort of position that the supporters just always crave, to have another player like Ashby in the midfield in his mould.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to even do justice to the kind of the player that he was. And just as you said, the legacy that he has left with the City faithful and even the playing group. I think that it's they still even have a vast respect for what was done by this squad in the early Premier League visits and how much it really just changed the outlook of City's future.
Yeah, and of course it was great that when he left, he went to Preston North End, where he was reunited with Phil Brown. So it was sort of a bit of a City old boys club there, which was at least great to see for him. Which I think he sort of finished off his career there, or at least in the higher divisions, he finished off there. He might have played on a little bit at a lower level, but no, that was also great to see for him. Look, I think he played a season for Hull United in 2015, but I think basically Preston was his last club. Of course, there was a couple of other players who left as well. Hamosi, Zayati, Matt Duke, of course, Craig Fagan as well. They all left as the season wore on. I think over the sort of January and onwards stretch of the season, there were a couple of more departures from that sort of Championship to Premier League mould at the club. But it was a real sort of changing of the guard when the Allams came in, because of course, with these departures, we then also had a couple of players joining the club who went on to pretty big things with City. We've got Aaron McLean and Matty Fryatt, who were really sort of, even at that time, were really big money signings. I think Fryatt was 1.2 million and McLean was $1 million, which, it's not that long ago, but that was still reasonably big sums of money at that time, and especially for a club like us who'd been sort of on the verge of administrative issues. And then, of course, central to that is James Chester as well. So, we kind of went on a bit of a spending spree from Manchester United's youth ranks at the time. We brought in Cameron Stewart as well. Corey Evans joined on loan. I think Brady was the season after. And then a couple of decent loan signings in goal with first Vito Minoni and then Brad Guzan, who sort of went on to pretty big things in the Premier League.
Yeah, I do remember this critically, because there was a meme that came out at the time, which was a remake of the Hull City crest, and it was the Manchester Tigers reserves or something like that. And I remember that being rather funny, because there was 5 or 6 United players on the books at the time, which was absurd, but I guess it was kind of exactly what we needed at the time. And it did speak about the relationship that we did have with Manchester United. And I think, was that largely due to Mike Phelan, or was that well before his time even?
I think it was actually Warren Joyce. I think Warren Joyce, because he'd been at, because I was looking this up because we had this, Brad and I had the same sort of speculation, because we weren't sure if it was Phelan or Joyce. But I think Joyce had been at Antwerp, where he'd known Fraser Campbell, I think maybe, and then came across and joined United, and then sort of obviously had the links with us, so was able to sort of set up that connection for us.
Yeah. No, I do remember it. And just on Matty Fryatt, I still remember the amount of goals that he would kind of would pick up. And I often remember him scoring in pairs. Like if he would score one, there was always a pretty good chance that Matty Fryatt would score his goals in bunches. So, I remember just not the fastest player and not necessarily a huge physical presence, but an amazing finisher. And I do remember him in this championship season in particular being a real prominent threat. I do believe he was our leading goal scorer. Looking back at it, I think he only ended up getting 9 or 10 goals particularly, but he was just certainly a spearhead in our attack. And perhaps it was him and Jay Simpson that was the likely striking combination before, as you mentioned, Aaron McLean came in.
Yeah, look, you've got a good memory. He scored the 9 goals for the season, which is pretty remarkable in only half a season to be our top scorer. But look, he was terrific, and sort of looking ahead a little bit to the 2012-13 season. But I saw posted on Twitter the other day the Leeds game where we won 2-0, where Aluko and Myler. I think it was it Myler and Corey Evans, I think, got the goals. And I saw the comment sort of made that game we went into where we were so dominant, we had Aluko and Corrin as our front two, because Fryatt was basically out injured all season in that first season under Bruce. And you think if Fryatt had been fit that season, where we just at times played some of the best football that I've seen under City, he could have, absolutely scored, upwards of 30 goals for the season. He's just one of those. And look, then he showed the following season in that FA Cup run that he still had it for us. And it's sort of a shame the way it ended the way it did, because I think he just never really got the way he led City in such a poor side. He never really got a good run of it in the good times.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and did have quite an extensive bout of injuries as well that certainly cut his career short. But yeah, he was a fantastic finisher. I will always remember that about Matty Fryatt.
And then just, I guess, finally, we sort of touched on it before, but with James Chester, almost probably the pick of the bunch from the United players, which at the time would have been reasonably remarkable to say, because I think Cameron Stewart sort of came in with the most hype and certainly started off like a house on fire for us. But Chester, he's another one sort of in the mold of like a Boaz Myhill or those sorts of guys who, it was really disappointing that after he left us, he just never really seemed to get a good go at it. And I don't actually even know where he is now. Is he at Stoke still? Or did he go to Stoke?
Yeah, perhaps. So it was, he went from us to Aston Villa, I believe, was the sign.
No, he was at West Brom I think he went from us to West Brom, where they tried to play him as a right back, which never predictably didn't work out. And I think it was from West Brom that he went to Villa, and then from Villa to Stoke.
Yeah, but for £300,000, that is just remarkable to pick up a player of James Chester's quality. And as you said, really, all signs were kind of pointing towards him leaving City because he was kind of trending in the right direction and was heading for a bigger club. So
he was almost he was the prototype Harry Maguire in a way, and Maguire did go on to obviously bigger and better things. And I was sure that Chester was going on to be, an international captain of a centre back at a big club and all sorts of things, which it just never really panned out for him.
And I believe Chester's success was one of the main reasons that Paul McShane ended up getting sent out on loan in this particular season as well, which we think about the resurgence of Super Paul McShane in the coming years after that. You find that quite remarkable indeed.
Yeah, absolutely remarkable. So he went out on loan to Barnsley, and it was sort of around this time where he'd been in the team for that first spell in the Premier League, and then sort of dipped out for a few loans, and then came back in, and it was almost like it was two different spells at the club, because such was the sort of gap in errors that McShane sort of experienced in that sense. But and I mean, Chester coming in, and also Jack Hobbs, who came in initially on loan from Leicester, I think, and then I think we signed him on a permanent deal in the summer. But you just look at the players that came in under the Allams, and there weren't a whole lot of misses in amongst them compared to some of the players that we'd had to sign on free transfers the previous transfer window. But we'll move on then and sort of look back at some of the games that we had, and we sort of already touched on that unbeaten away run, which I think got up to 14 games. And it was a tremendous second half of the season, considering where we'd found ourselves and the fact that we sort of picked ourselves up and managed to finish in 11th spot. And I have sort of memories of those last few games. I think we had a sort of 3-game run against Watford, Swansea and Doncaster, where we picked up 7 points, and we were sort of an outside chance at the playoffs. And I think we didn't really make it a serious chance, just because we just didn't think, we'd sort of left our run a little bit too late. But I think it was a game against Middlesbrough, I think, was the game where Scott McDonald, of course, Australian, breaks our hearts and gets a hat-trick to sort of condemn us to another season in the Championship. But realistically, given the way we'd started the season, we would have taken that at the start of the season.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I do remember it was one of those seasons that they kept kind of staying close enough to the playoff places to keep you interested. And they were just sort of snapping at the heels of that sixth place spot. But you did mention the Scott McDonald goal against us, and of course breaking our hearts, particularly being Aussies. But I also remember that game, the 2-2 draw against Middlesbrough that season, that was played in some of the heaviest snow I think I've ever seen a football match take place in. And I remember Nick Barmby missed a sitter in that game, and Robert Corrin scored a goal from quite some range. But I think it was one of those ones where the ball kind of skidded and got lost in the snow, and trickled over. And I remember that being just an incredible spectacle of a game to watch, just given the fact that the conditions were beyond abhorrent.
Which is really crazy. You think, I mean, I guess maybe it's a sign of global warming or whatever you want to call it, but the fact that these days you don't get a whole lot of heavy winters anymore, I guess, and not many snow-filled games. But yeah, that 2010-2011 season, I do remember quite a few pretty snow-filled games, and of course with that white away kit, it always made it a bit of a difficult viewing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just remember they came out to shovel the snow just to reveal the goal box lines, and that was all you could really see from the Sky camera. So it was a fascinating game.
Yeah, and of course, sort of a tale of two halves of the season. We had the same result against Leeds in both halves, the 2-2 draw that sort of condemned us to the relegation zone the first time around. But then another 2-2 draw later in the season, which realistically, we probably should have gone on to win, because we were up 2-0 from goals from both Fried and Chester. But of course, it was a future City player in Robert Snodgrass who got Leeds back into that game. And I sort of have memories at that time of Snodgrass. He was sort of a pretty passionate player, and I don't know if it was while he was at Leeds or it might have been afterwards when he was at Norwich, I think it was, where he was still getting pretty riled up by the City supporters. So it was clearly still pretty fiery, had fiery links to his Yorkshire roots with Leeds, I guess, and his clashes with us. But it's always sort of funny seeing future City players on the score sheet in games like that.
Yeah, and I do remember Leeds were the perennial or serial underachievers, where they would often have a flying start to the season. I think there was probably 2 or 3 seasons in a row where they were right up the top and then faded dismally towards the end, which was incredibly satisfying to see. But yeah, I do remember Snodgrass being on the score sheet frequently, and that was one of the main reasons that I was extremely excited when we finally signed him as a City fan, given that we had seen him score a lot for our rivals, but he'd been linked with us plenty of times before he actually did put pen to paper and come across. So I do remember there was a level of excitement of his signing purely based on his reputation of being a very prolific championship goal scorer.
Yeah, and then at the end of season awards, Anthony Gerrard was named Player of the Year, which in some ways was a little bit surprising just because of the caliber of players who came in after him, but it sort of underlined just how important a signing he was at the start of the season to sort of level us off. And we sort of talked about this a little bit last time around, but I remember at the time being really sort of keen or excited to see him sign permanently, and was a bit disappointed that it never came to fruition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I remember there being him coming with huge accolades and being a extremely under the radar type player, and he was always reliable without doing anything incredibly over the top. And I guess that again, when we talk about the players like Ashby, who are who kind of just the grafters, who we kind of appreciate for their work ethic and just their reliability. I remember putting him directly into that bracket, and as you mentioned, it was quite surprising that he didn't end up signing permanently.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then, of course, rather predictably, John Bostock got goal of the season for his goal against Swansea in that first match. So sort of one of his few highlights for City. I think the other was scoring against Leeds. So if you're going to score a worldie on the first day of the season and then score against Leeds, I think that's a pretty good way to sum up a City career.
Yeah, especially if you're going to disappear straight after and
never return.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, it was a pretty eventful first season back in the championship, and it's pretty remarkable to think that it's essentially 10 years ago, in a week or two, really, since the Allams took over. So, a pretty timely time to be doing this episode. But no, look, it's been great to look back on that season with you, and thanks for joining me.
Not a problem. Great to be here, Alex. And I guess it's kind of nice to go back and look at the successes and I guess the pivotal moments in the City career, or I guess of the last decade, and remember some of the key reasons why we are where we are now, and I guess the fabric of the club. It's been really good to kind of ride the wave and see the journey. I think it probably speaks testament as to why we're able to watch a team in League One and have I guess such a joy level around it, knowing that the bright future that is still kind of snapping at the heels if we're able to muster another championship run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, it's gonna be great to look ahead to the next couple of episodes where we'll look at the next seasons. Of course, there's all the controversy around the Nick Barmby departure and Nick Barmby's appointment in the first place, and then of course the wild ride we went on under Steve Bruce, which it's always interesting, listening to guys like Kane Lewis-Potter, for instance, in the current first team, who basically grew up in the Steve Bruce era of City. So it's sort of the era that probably captured a lot of new City supporters, or at least solidified for a lot of people their love for City around the area and internationally as well. So a really sort of momentous time in City's history.
Yeah, one of the things that was also kind of stood out to me as well as I was doing the kind of research and notes before we came to air, just looking at the crowd figures as well, and just seeing the buzz and energy around Hull, and I guess just the city as a whole, how much they really did embrace the Tigers at this time period, and watching that, that not just making the Premier League and kind of being relegated rather shortly afterwards. But the fact that that kind of moments of making the Premier League really solidified the supporter base, and just those crowd figures were unbelievable. It was regularly up around the 20,000s, and I guess in Corona times it's hard to be judging teams by their crowd numbers and things like that. But we do kind of remain optimistic that one day we will see those crowd numbers back in at the KCOM. And hopefully that comes with a lot more City success.
No, and it's a great point. I think that the top crowd figure for that season was about 24,000, and some people will sort of mock the stature of the club a little bit, but really it's a one club City with a fantastic support, and it really sadly shows and underlines the negative impact the Allams have had on recent seasons, that the crowds haven't been at those heights, because this season really was a testament to the fact that there was so much not negativity around the supporters, but just around the trajectory of the club, in the sense that we'd sort of dropped out of the Premier League, were shedding players, had all sorts of financial issues. There really could have been a complete drop off in the crowd support, but everyone sort of stuck with the club and really hung with them that season and in the next as well, and was a really testament to the loyalty and the passion of the City supporters that really stuck with the club during this tough time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that if we may dare in the coming weeks to give the Allams a 10-year report card, if that's a segment that would be willing to take on. But I think that if we look at where they started, and as we mentioned at the top of the episode, just the heights and the optimism that did surround the club, and we see that reflected in crowd numbers, we see that it reflected in the player signings, and to see what's transpired since, it's really disappointing when you consider what could have been. Yeah, definitely.
Well, anyway, thanks for joining me for this episode, and I'm looking forward to the episodes to come.
Yeah, that sounds good. It was good to be here, and we look forward to the next one.
No worries, and thank you everyone for listening in. Whether you're watching this as a patron, we thank you for that, or whether you're watching it a week later on our YouTube channel or on audio. Thanks for listening in. We'll probably put up a poll. We did a poll last time on the best free signing of the decade. I think this time I'll probably do perhaps the most exciting Man United recruit that we made during this little era of ours, which I think is potentially a tricky one to answer, but we'll see how that one goes. But until the next episode, thank you for listening.